Susan Shares and her children could never have imagined what would unfold in the fields just to the north of their house on November the 29th of 1864, in the same way that the Carter family or the McGavick family could not ever have imagined what was going to happen inside and around their houses on the afternoon of November the 30th of 1864. 3 families, 3 houses, and one incredible story about what unfolded here in the very last waning moments of the American Civil War. The 160th anniversary cycle presents us with an incredible opportunity to reflect on the events that took place in Middle Tennessee and really all across the nation throughout the very pivotal year of 1864. And over the course of the next year, the Battle of Franklin Trust at all 3 of our sites, Carter House, Carnton, Rippavilla, we will be making efforts to get visitors to understand just how important 1864 was. Yes, the war goes from 1861 to 1865, and there are 4 years to pick from that everyone could make the case are incredibly crucial. 1861 because the war begins, 1862 because of the revealing of the horror of the war. 1863, of course, gets so much of the attention because it is in so many ways transformative. 1864 is a year of unfettered violence that just breaks out across the American landscape. And then the ultimate moment is in 1864, we are facing an election. And for the very first time in our nation's history and all of the world's history, a republic attempts to hold a presidential election in the midst of a civil war. And Abraham Lincoln is facing an election against former U.S. Army General, now Democratic candidate for the presidency, and George McClellan. Abraham Lincoln, even in August of 1864, was not certain that he would be reelected to the presidency. August the 27th, he had his cabinet sign a secret memorandum, essentially vowing their support for him to finish the war if he did not win re-election. He would have from November to March to win the war. The same day that he had them sign that secret memorandum, Mobile Bay fell to Admiral Farragut. And then within the course of the next 4 days, Atlanta would have fallen to General William Tecumseh Sherman as the Confederate Army of Tennessee abandoned the city and marched out of Georgia and into Alabama. And of course, that puts them on a path here to Middle Tennessee by the time we get to November of 1864. And violence breaks out across the landscapes in Columbia and Spring Hill and Franklin and Nashville. 1864 is a pivotal year for us to reflect on at sites like Carter House, Carnton, and Rippavilla. To come to this site, to hear the story of the people that experienced this incredibly tumultuous 12-month period in our American Civil War, it's an experience unlike any other. We also have to remember at this moment, too, that 2024 gives us an incredible responsibility to reflect on the previous decades since the sesquicentennial. So much has changed in that time. And I think our understanding of the American Civil War and what it means to us as a nation has changed in that time as well. There's less emphasis on celebrations, and there is more of an emphasis on reflection, which I think is more true to what the veterans themselves did in the post-war years than we really give it credit for. At the end of the day, their reflections on the battles were always somber. And it was only really over the course of a century that we allowed the stories of battles and of battle reenactments to come to dominate how we would remember our American Civil War. And I think, too, in the last decade, there's been less of an emphasis on the Confederacy as a whole and more of the emphasis on the nation and its survival, because from 1861 to 1865, the nation had never faced a greater threat. The American Republic hung in jeopardy through 4 years, no more crucial than 1864. We never really got a chance to really get to grips with the war. Just right after the sesquicentennial, we saw the murders at AME Church in Charleston, where 9 African-American churchgoers were murdered by a white supremacist. 2 years after that, in protests around Confederate monuments and iconography in Charlottesville, violent protests break out there that resulted in the death of a young woman. We've also seen a reckoning about the war, about the Confederacy, and a reckoning about slavery over the course of the last decade that I think has got us in a position for the 160th anniversary here at Franklin to reflect on what this battle in the waning moments of the American Civil War, what it can show us, what it can teach us. What happened in Franklin in November of 1864 was not some matter of happenstance or sheer coincidence that both armies would arrive there. Susan Shares, her children, they were here at Rippavilla, a house just off to the east of the Columbia Turnpike, today's U.S. Highway 31, when 2 armies converged on Spring Hill, John Bell Hood and his Confederate Army of Tennessee, hoping to bring the ruin of General John Schofield's Federal Army as they made their way here towards Spring Hill. But of course, it started moving throughout the day, and by that evening, the road was never blocked. The Columbia Turnpike remained open, and John Schofield managed to conduct this incredible escape up to Franklin. What happened or what didn't happen at Spring Hill directly leads to what does happen in Franklin the very next day. It kicks open this door to a tragedy. 10,000 men are killed, wounded, or captured, missing in 5 hours of combat on the south side of Franklin. And when it's over, men are buried in 2-foot and 3-foot graves, and the war drags on. 1864 had begun as a year of incredible stalemate. Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, out in the Eastern Theater, had fought through a bloody summer of 1863, and as we moved into 1864, it seemed as though nothing had changed. It had been several months since the fighting at Gettysburg had provided a boon to Northern morale. It had been several months since General Ulysses S. Grant's capture of Vicksburg had done the same. And as we go into 1864, there's a great question of what the outcome of this war will be. It takes a year of indescribable death and carnage and incalculable loss to determine its outcome. And as we get into 1864, we begin to see the reality of what emancipation means to an enslaved population in the Upper South. Middle Tennessee, we begin to see black men enlisting in the United States Army. We'll see men and women and children making their way up towards Nashville to find freedom in contraband camps. Armies of liberation begin to make their way into the Deep South. Meanwhile, the war seemingly grows more and more violent every day. Men are not simply shooting at each other with their rifles anymore. Now it is a fight to the death, and men are beating one another to death. And the nation suffered. We have been doing this for 3 years. We were about to enter into our 4th year of the American Civil War. And the bloody fighting here in the West comes to an end in November and December of 1864. And Lee's army surrenders out in Appomattox, and the war's over, and at a tremendous cost. Some 700,000 men had died in a 4-year period. We were left in ruin, and the key to ending the war was 1864.